I swear to you, Humphrey, that in my young life I have heard many such indulgences applied to this glorious and spineful music.
Well, it didn't sound too indulgent to me, Clem. What's wrong with that way of playing? I take it you want to depict that as being...
I think that's a violation of Beethoven's purpose, the way I played it just now. Yes, I was trying to do a bad takeoff of many performances that I've heard at the opening of the third piano concerto.
In what particular respect?
In the respect that the tempo that I set at the beginning, presumably the tempo that some Teutonic conductor would have passed on to me, was let go immediately by the soloist whose role I was trying to take.
Much slower.
Almost twice as slow, yes, indeed. And as such, the whole spine of the music is lost. One no longer can feel a sense of backbone, a sense of propulsion to it.
Well, I'd like really this evening to take up from where we left off the other day and talk a good deal about your approach to interpretation, which I think does mark you out as a very special pianist amongst pianists. Particularly perhaps with respect to Beethoven, because you're in the middle of making a huge, great cycle of Beethoven
Indeed,
Sonata
yes.
recordings, aren't you? And what your point is that you want the spinefulness to be brought out, is that right?
I would like to put an end to what I think of as one of the most lamentable traditions of piano playing, and that is that somehow in music of what we like to call very loosely the classical period, there is a tradition among pianists, and it's a very venerable tradition. It's been passed on with mistakes added in each generation, that one can apply to the instrument simply because one tends to play large chunks of such selections as a Beethoven piano concerto alone or with very minor orchestral accompaniment. One can apply to it a degree of tenuto, a degree of rubato, a degree of changingness of rhythm that no conductor with proper training and in his right mind would ever apply to a Beethoven symphony. And this, I think, has come about perhaps because we have exaggerated the sense of the protagonist's role in the concerto. We exaggerate the sense of dualism as between orchestra and soloist, as between individual and mass, as between masculine and feminine statements, indeed, as Mr. Tovey used to put it. And I think this is a great mistake. I think what we must try to remember is that Beethoven wrote that concerto, let me see, in 1799. So let us say 49 years after Bach wrote the Kunstfuge. And 49 years isn't very long, you know. That's less ago than the First World War is from us today.
And the Kunstfuge would have had a solid line of tempo.
Indeed, yes.
Play me the concerto as you think it should have.
As I think it should be played, yes. From the orchestra, from the pianist, from the orchestra, from the pianist, from the orchestra. Indeed, I am not, as you know, Humphrey, a very dogmatic person in some respects, but if I had one almost inflexible law to apply to Beethoven, it would be that there must be a sense of consistency of tempo from beginning to end, at least in terms of the Beethoven of the period that interests us now, the early middle years of Beethoven's life.
Is that actually all that an exceptional view? Don't most interpreters...
It is not as among conductors. I mean, I can think of no reputable conductor of this generation who wouldn't espouse a view like that. But I can think of very few pianists. This is not an colleague-like statement. I don't mean that. There are many people who play Beethoven absolutely magnificently. My only objection is that they play it with the outlook of sort of Petersburg Conservatory 1901, you know? And it's very curious, and I think it has to do with the fact that for many years now, background annotators on phonograph records and program note writers and symphony concert booklets have told us so much about this sense of struggle, of duality between orchestra and piano. They must always be at war, you know? And I don't really see why this is so. As you know, I recorded recently the Emperor Concerto with Leopold Stokowski, and our only guiding criterion for this performance was that we were determined to make it sound as much like the Eroica Symphony with a sort of descant piano as we possibly could. The theory being that we would like to tie things together so that instead of sounding 4 bars to the orchestra, 6 to the piano, 4 to the orchestra, and so on, it was in fact one long symphonic statement, and the piano on occasion was instrumental decoration to this statement, but it was not a warring faction that was a purely disruptive element. And to that end, I think we made it into what is in our time virtually a new piece. I don't say it was better played than other recorded performances, it was just played more properly in Beethoven's terms, I think.
Can you give an example of that to make it?
Yes,
make a point?
indeed. Do you remember the end of the long orchestral tutti, which ends something like this? Right. Now, still orchestra. Entrance of the piano. No cessation at all. It's a slow tempo, mind you, but no stopping. Now then, return to the orchestra. Pianist again. That whole long section, I have in fact not changed tempo one whit, I think. I haven't a metronome to prove it, but I don't think I can be accused of it. And yet I've changed color many times. There's all sorts of inflection. It has to go on. In fact, one has to compensate for the lack of metric division by many changes of color.
And other pianists, you feel, just don't observe that enough?
Well, I can only say to you that my God, as a pianist, has always been utter Schnabel.
Yes.
I revere him as I do no other pianist, living or dead. And even he, rest his soul, tends to pull things around a bit, and he, I think I can honestly say, made the greatest statement of the Emperor Concerto, 2 of them indeed, on recordings, then or now perhaps. But nevertheless, he was somehow subject to that tradition as well.
So far we've only talked about the concerti, but come to the sonatas where you haven't got this battle principle, which you've now tried to eliminate. Mm-hmm. Would you say that you're still pitting yourself against the tempo? Are you still trying to make the thing run all the way through?
Generally speaking, yes.
Or can you now indulge more rebut? I mean, Schnabel's
well, I think
records.
yes, indeed, Schnabel's records and most everyone's records. I think that you can perhaps dare more in the sonata for the simple reason that you don't have to worry about whether or not the strings are quite with you at that moment of the cadence, you know. Whether you should do so is another question. I think it's quite possible to play a sonata of the early years, more or less contemporaneous with the Beethoven C minor concerto, for instance, and to play it with an absolutely inexorable sense of pace from beginning to end without ever changing one eyelash of it.
Isn't that rather rigid and inflexible? I mean, that seems to be the other side of the coin, that there's a certain lack of warmth, possibly. You may want to lean into the second subject if it's
I don't think it has
gentler.
anything to do with warmth. I think that by making other kinds of coloristic compensations, you can give a feeling of infinite variety. Let me try playing for you. I know you resent the way I play this particular piece, but let me
This is
try.
going to be the C minor.
This is going to be our C minor, that's right. Burtoniana, as I now think of it. And let me try playing for you the C minor sonata as you would like to have it played. Shall I first? Or as I would?
No, play it as you play it.
As I play it.
Inexorable
Right.
and
Right.
straight through.
And really all that I'm proposing there is that one doesn't tend to differentiate very much as between... One doesn't go to sleep over that, you know?
I think your record is even faster than that, actually, isn't it?
Well, yes, but as I tell you, speed itself is not important to me particularly. And I'm quite prepared to adopt your tempo as being perhaps more faithful to the spirit of the music. In fact, I've grown to like it since we started this argument some days ago.
Would you say that this principle of driving through is always applicable to all sonatas in that case?
No, I think that one could make a case for several examples where you could impose exactly the opposite side of this coin upon the music. And indeed, the very next sonata to this one in Beethoven's output, the Sonata Opus 10, number 2, has one of these moments because, like 10, number 1, it's written in sort of early Heldenlebenish Beethoven manner, except that it's a more pastoralish quality. It's a little less outgoing, but it has the same kind of onwardness, really. Mm-hmm. But it has one very remarkable feature, and that is that the recapitulation, the sense of return to the home key, does not, in fact, return to the home key. It returns to a middling distant relative, D major. The piece is in F major, and it comes into D major. Now, the customary thing, as you know, is to return to F major, and the theme itself is this. Might well expect that at the beginning of the recapitulation that's what you hear, but instead of which, what you hear in fact is... Now it seems to me that this is a sufficient departure from the tonal thinking of his period, end of the 18th century, to warrant a little investigation. There is nothing in the score to suggest that one need do anything about this. I think it's one of those glorious ideas that Beethoven just suddenly hit upon at that moment, you know. But it is the first time in his sonata catalog that one finds a recapitulation that does not, in fact, recapitulate a tonality. So, quite arbitrarily, and with no excuse from any autograph study or anything of that kind, I can't make a case for it of having spent many afternoons in bibliotheques around the world, you know. I would like to tell you that that was the case, but it was not. Nor can I make a case for it from the sketchbooks. Quite arbitrarily, I imposed upon it a whole new tempo. I introduced
on the recapitulation.
On the recapitulation, I introduced a kind of andante at this moment, which is perhaps totally out of keeping with the character of the theme, but is entirely within the nature of this whole new identity that he introduced to us. And I think it works very well. Let me play you a little bit of the way it actually begins, and then I'll skip over a bit and come to the recapitulation. reasonably expect that tempo to be preserved throughout. It works very well. But in fact, when we get to that point, what I really do is something like this. Get ready. Then compound the effects of anything. Then slowly let it go.
Slowly letting it pass.
And in due course, work back to the opening tempo. And this is a rather radical departure, which may not sound very radical in view of the nice pastoralish quality of those themes, but I'm sure that a lot of people, sat with urtext in hand and scratched their heads at that when I recorded it that way.
Isn't it really giving too much weight? That's what I wonder, whether in pulling the tempo around, but you say you're turning over the other side
Yes,
of the coin.
I would have another sort of objection, Humphrey. I don't know whether it's giving too much weight. I think it's a very mock, profound German academic provincial 1918 sort of thing to do.
Your thoughts?
Yes, but I would have another sort of objection altogether, that as I do it, it becomes part of a recording which will be listened to, I hope, forever, probably, in fact, for 5 years until somebody else makes a better one. But nevertheless, it will be listened to on repeated occasions, presumably by the person who buys that recording. And we know from, by no means organized psychological tests, but we know from reactions that record companies have received from their listeners that what they like least are, in fact, peccadillos that they have to listen to again and again and again. What works best on a recording tends to be, albeit an inspired, but a relatively straightforward performance. Straightforward as to tempo.
My objection to recordings has often been precisely that I don't want the same thing to happen twice, even if it is in fact a steady tempo. I'd sooner
Yes, but you have this lust for blood, Humphrey. I mean, you want to sit there in the arena and hope that somebody, that Hamlet forgets his lines or something, You probably think, oh, gad, Heifetz has done it again, straight through to the end, I mean, this is all part of your professional cynicism, and I don't think you must make that de rigueur for the rest of the
No, I'm not a cynic. I just love hearing music played in a concert hall, but we won't open that problem today.